My name is Nick Duggan. I'm a volunteer at the Hawley collection. We're bringing a few things together, actually. We're bringing together the tradition of collecting, which is very much what Ken Hawley was about, and somehow I seem to have slipped into that mode as well. We're also telling the story of a couple of Sheffield, I'll use the word cutlery, you know, it could be cutlery, it could be flatware, it could be hollowware, but I'll use the phrase cutlery because that's the bit that we sort of identify with. And the nice thing about drilling down on the story about any company, you come across a few surprises, and as you see we get going, there will be a... Right, this is where it all starts. But essentially, 11 years ago when I retired, I needed something to do. And I originally had the idea of framing Sheffield cutlery. And I still do a bit of that. And over the years, I've sold 550 framed Sheffield cutlery pictures. But I think one of the first bits of cutlery I ever bought was this. And I don't know, I sort of fell in love with it for all sorts of reasons. One is it was different, okay? And that pattern with these ivy leaves was really, you know, quite significant. You turned it over and you got the pattern again. I mean, generally, if you've got a spoon and it's got a pattern on one side and you lay it, you know, face up sort of thing, why decorate the back? So again, this is saying something about the Victorian extravagance, about doing things in those stages of production that people didn't need. The other thing, and this is so typical of many things of beauty that were made in Sheffield, it doesn't tell you who made it. All it says on the back, it's got a number. It's got this number. And it's called, so it's got a number and it's got an A. I mean, lots of Sheffield companies put an A on, which sort of implied quality, but it's put a number on it, and that's a registration number. Okay? So that design was sort of registered, almost a bit like a patent. And that was registered, that particular design was registered in 1896. So it's quite nice when you've got something like this, and, you know, if I've got my cutlery store, which again I sometimes do, and you can say to people, well, you know, this is 130 years old. So we know how old it is. But say, so we've got a lovely pattern, you know, a lot of work's gone into that, a lot of different stages in the production, and that sort of started this sort of little journey. I then came across this advert. The Sheffield Cutlery and Plate direct from Sheffield. You know, what was it like going shopping in 1890? Okay, you know, where did you go to buy what you wanted to buy? Did you have department stores? Did you have a sort of a slightly burgeoning mail order business? I mean, one of the famous mail order companies in Sheffield was J.G. Graves. He made his money, Mr. Graves, from, you know, a mail order business. So so I was quite pleased to find this advert, because it was a bit like, hang on a minute, that's that same pattern, and it appears there in several different places. But not everything on that advert is from George Bishop Company, okay? So this was actually William Cheetham & Sons, who also traded as a Sheffield Goods Manufacturing Company by 1896, and the Sheffield Goods Manufacturing Company in 1910. And Cheetham's were originally cutlers and silversmiths, and they were at the Havelock Works, Young Street, which is down by sort of Waitrose. But actually, by 1909, they described themselves as cutlery merchants. So possibly they could make more money selling other people's quality cutlery than they actually could from making it themselves. And again, you know, there's a few other clues in there, like that very top sugar sifter, that spoon with holes in it, which is one at the back, that says the Edinburgh pattern. That's not a George Bishop item, but again, there is something about, you know, the names of the patterns. A slightly better giveaway, okay, this is a business card from the family. So it's telling us a lot more here. So it's George Bishop and Sons, okay? And they did have a trademark. If your name's Bishop, what's your trademark going to be? It's a bishop's mitre, okay? And so you can see on the one hand, you've got the bishop's mitre there, and actually on the George Bishop cutlery items at the back, 90% of them have no maker's mark on the back of them. They've just got the number. But a few of the knives have actually got that mitre mark, and it says GB and Sons electroplate. So essentially, we managed to put together that spoon was actually made by George Bishop. And that pattern is the thing that defines George Bishop. Nobody else made that pattern. I still can't answer the question, why were things of beauty made in Sheffield and people didn't put the maker's mark on the back of it? I can understand it occasionally when it was something that was in several components that had to be put together, because somebody made the handle, somebody made the ferrule, somebody made the end bit. But I don't understand it with this one piece of cutlery. Other than if, I suppose he was so proud of this pattern and he felt it was so distinctive, this is mine and this tells me what I am. The other place where you find information about this is this wonderful book by Geoffrey Tweedale. All my talks have got a good chunk of information from Geoff Tweedale. He's a good friend of the Hawley collection. His latest volume, volume 3 of the Sheffield Cutlery Manufacturers, I think it's now 750 pages long. He's taken all the pictures out to make way for more company information. But he tells us that George Bishop was born in Ecclesall, the son of William, a razor grinder, and his early works was as a silver finisher. Now, I'm just going to go back a second, because we just said he was born in Ecclesall. What was the name of his works? Ecclesall New Works. So, again, his logo was named after his surname, and his cutlery company was based after where he lived. So originally started off as a confectioner. Again, you know, the 1880s, the 1890s, you're thinking, how am I going to make my living in the world? How am I going to get rich? Is it by selling sweets to the Victorians, who definitely had sweet teeth, I think? Or is it actually, am I going to make more money by cutlery? So George Bishop & Sons, the electroplate manufacturer, 216 Rockingham Street. And his first registered design was not that spoon I held up, but many of the other items on there have got an earlier registration number, which is actually 1891. So the earliest he was registering items was 1891. So he started off at 216 Rockingham Street. And, you know, a lot of that area, you know, off sort of Division Street and things, has been redeveloped. But at Court 14 in Rockingham Street, there were 7 numbered dwellings and a total of 36 businesses. And, you know, it is this thing about, you know, almost like tenement buildings with several floors and several different companies working. And so, you know, the Bishop was at number 18, but also at number 18 was a knife grinder, a knife hafter, putting the handles on, a cutlet, a fleam. A fleam is a knife for cutting, for bleeding animals, essentially, a little blade on the end. A scout knife maker. Now, that probably wasn't for Boy Scout, that was probably for people who went in the Wild West and were, you know, breaking new territory type scouts. A table knife cutler, Herbert Morton, so, you know, Morton's a name that we see down on that West Street area. Charles Coulson, a German silver buffer. Charles Arthur, a brass turner. Horace Parkin, a joiner and tool manufacturer. And I suppose you just got to think that at number 18, sometimes a couple of those people might have put their heads together and said, perhaps we could collaborate, perhaps we could join on something, or I've got an idea, have you got an idea? I don't know, but you know, these would have been very, very noisy, smelly, dusty, dirty places, but these, you know, these were making Sheffield's fortune. So we've got the Bishops moved between 2 factories. You moved between 216 Rockingham Street, and later on he expanded into the 6 numbered addresses. And the Lambert Works is where John Watts is, where we're going to come back to a bit later in the story. This is that courtyard off Rockingham Street, and that's court number 14. So essentially, this notion of a very crowded court, and certainly if you looking at the old maps of that area, there are so many cutlery works with lots of fancy names. A few of them, like the Aberdeen Works off Division Street, are still there, but many of them have actually gone in their traces. But you know, it's really interesting looking at an old map and that whole hive of activity. George Bishop and Sons, and clearly it was quite a significant enterprise. I think I counted there's something like 27 people on that picture. They look happy. You know, they were probably told, you lot go out there and get your photograph taken and look happy today. And presumably that chap in the centre with the bowler hat on, that's the boss. That's the owner. That's George. You know, the people upstairs, I don't know whether they were, you know, were they. The product range, all these things are actually on the back. And again, so having fallen in love with that one spoon, I have over the last 11 years on eBay, if I see something by George Bishop, I tend to buy it. Generally, I only try and collect one of them, but sometimes end up more than one. And occasionally, if you come to my cutlery stall, you might see me selling the odd piece. But yeah, but again, it's, you know, it's lovely, and it's getting harder now to find anything that's different. But again, I've learned a bit of information, say, from some of the family that are here, so I'm keen to see the other pattern they've mentioned. You know, why just have one pair of sugar tongs? Well, you could offer 3 different pairs of sugar tongs. And that, again, that's so typical of this, you know, booming Sheffield cutlery industry with such a wide range. Look at the pickle forks. I'm not going to ask you to tell me this, but if you don't own a pickle fork, you should be really embarrassed because you shouldn't be putting your fingers in a jar. But the pickle forks, there's one lot where the prongs go inwards and there's one where the forks go outwards. So you even had a choice of pickle forks. I think George, in the story, he was a silversmith. He had some skills in engraving. And so whereas the pattern was almost certainly stamped out, if you stare long enough at those two spoons, they're not identically the same. If you look at the circles, they're different sizes. Okay? So actually, they were hand engraved. Okay? So, you know, again, you can imagine this, these pieces of flatware moving through the factory and different people doing things at different stages. You know, is that fish smiling from the big fish server? I'm not sure. But, you know, and I'm sure if you were the engraver putting the fish on the fish servers, you had a bit of a choice, you know, what expression am I going to give the fish today? How am I feeling? And, you know, something about, was this a good company to work for, a bad company to work for? Okay, well, they went on a work outing. They hired a charabang. Now, they might have only have had 1 day's holiday, I don't know. But anyway, they went for it. Okay, and again, I think, you know, that looks like George with the sitting in the middle there with the nice hat on. And where was the destination, eh? Were they going to Bakewell or were they going to Cleethorpes? I don't know. Okay, so he brought his sons into the business, Thomas and Robert, and they continued in business until 1940. And actually, the company was liquidated. And from what I understand, it was they were worried about being bombed in the war. Okay? And I have got some questions about the company. So did they simply carry on making those same products that they'd registered in 1891 and 1896? Was that such a good pattern? Was it so well known? Did they have shops that wanted to stock it that literally that was the thing that they made? Obviously, they had that whole range. So I'm not sure of the question, did they make other things? They may have made some bigger items of hollowware. Tea sets, sugar bowls, and did they make products other than the Ivini pattern? Now, somebody in the family has told me today, literally, so that there's another pattern. So I don't know, but I'm hoping to find out that at the end. So I think it's partly saying this is not the full story, you know, and you take the lid off these stories and you find out more that there is more research to do. Essentially, up to now, I suppose, I've been merging what Geoffrey Tweedale's told me, what I've gained from the internet, and by looking at the objects. So we're linking now to John Watts. And the other thing about John Watts is we've got loads. So in the Hawley collection, we have nothing from George Bishop. We've got lots of things from George Watts. So at George Bishop, he had two sons. He had Thomas and he had Herbert. When the business went bust in 1940, Thomas invested in Sanders and Bowers, who were another Sheffield cutlery company. And Sanders and Bowers made one of the brands of Sanders and Bowers was the Friar brand, and they made a very distinctive knife blade. Okay, and there's some actually on the table, and in fact Arthur Price said that was one of the best blades that was made in Sheffield, and I think actually ultimately Arthur Price took over Sanders and Bowers, but it's just that bit of a roadmap. And then the sort of generation at the bottom, we've got Vera Ivini. What's that pan? Ivini, so it's known as the Ivini pattern. And the sort of sense that in every generation, potentially anyway, somebody could be called Ivini in that family. We've got Cyril and we've got Ronald. And the link there is that Ronald became the manager of George Bishop. Not the owner, as sometimes is stated by some people. Okay, well, let's just have a bit of John Watts. Founded West Bar Green, 1765, by Michael Shaw, a clog, clasp and dog collar maker. You see, the first thing that comes to mind when you say dog collar is Vickers, isn't it? You know, it's sort of like, well, actually it wasn't. It was dogs, not Vicker. 1883, the business was taken over by Brian Bates from Buxton. 1853, Bates joined John Watts. 1862, the partnership was dissolved. Bates returned to Buxton to run hotels and eventually left £17,000, which in 1862's money is quite a lot of money. And John Watts was one of Bates' executors and took control of the business and began to expand. So again, this is quite common in Sheffield cutlery companies. You'll get somebody gives the name to the company, somebody else might get involved, people will come and go. Often the company's kept the original name. So you know, 200 years into the company, you might find there's nobody with any family links whatsoever to that company, but the name still remains. So there they are, clog buckles. Not sure you've got anybody wearing clogs today, but, you know, I guess this sort of, you know, 1800s, everybody's wearing clogs. But it's interesting, isn't it? You know, you've got the sort of slightly, well, I'm not sure, I don't know, the bottom right, they look a bit more utilitarian. The gold ones, they look a bit posher. You know, there's all sorts of questions you could ask about this. Could you swap the buckles on your clogs for when you were going out? If you're going out posh, did you put on a gold buckle and take the black one off? Every fire service and police force in the country had their own distinctive clog buckles, which probably were made by John Watts. I mean, there were other people that made clog buckles, but you know, this was the thing that they made. This was their key product when they started working. And clearly, they set a business up where there was significant demand. And you know, it's great. So Christopher was here today. I went round to his house and the family, and he got this box out and said, "I've never opened this box." And we managed to open it, and that's what was inside. There are some loose buckles that are in the Hawley collection that are on the side there, but you know, again, something that's had its day. And that's you know, that's just a picture of a clog. I nicked it off the internet, which has the, you know, has the buckle on it. So in the catalogue, you know, which again, this is something from the Hawley collection: clasps and toe plates, cloggers and shoemakers' tools and accessories. So again, there's a bit of a sense here of also making tools, and there's a sort of statement here saying, I'll just come over this side and read a bit of it. By a judgment in the Chancery Division of the High Court of Justice delivered in action, whereupon I was plaintiff on the 3rd of November 1899, it was ordered and adjudged that I was entitled to the sole right of the user as designating clasps and toe plates of my manufacture of the words, letters, and numbers or combinations thereof set out or illustrated in this catalogue and price list. So that notion of a bit of protectionism, that notion that possibly somebody else was copying the products, and there's a wonderful thing there, you know, some sort of coupon you can fill in, and you probably got some discount if you wanted to go and buy more than one pair of clog buckles. So lots of choice. Again, this is so typical of a Sheffield catalogue. You know, it wasn't you had one set of shoe buckles. The other thing was sizes. Lots of those on the back looked like they were maybe children's clogs. You know, and again, lots of really nice. You know, presumably these things refer to sizes. One of the great things about the Hawley collection, we don't just collect the things that look pretty. You know, and Ken would have gone into John Watts, and he would have said, "Can I have it?" Or he would have looked at stuff and said, "I would like that." So, you know, we literally have a box of. They generally came in pairs, the clog buckles. We've got some toe caps there, sort of steel toe caps, and we've also got some of the rims that you would have put round the front of your shoes. There was a point where in the, I don't know when it was, but the factory was very extensive, and some of the rooms had been left virtually untouched, and behind a sort of false wall, at one point they found loads of clog making equipment, and actually some museum of clog making in Lancashire came and got it all, basically. So, and there is, I did look up, there is still a clog museum somewhere in Lancashire. Oh yeah, so dog collars. Again, I've not yet come across on the internet a Sheffield-made dog collar. So these are just images. So you need to use your imagination, but you know, and if you've got a dog, maybe you need to be just thinking outside the box now and thinking, you know, do you want to? Perhaps some entrepreneur in Sheffield could start making Sheffield dog collars. Again, I think maybe that might be quite nice. So they expanded. So they started off in a small tenement factory in Lambert Street, also housed a cutler and a coffin maker. 1881, they employed 2 men and 8 women. So in 1881, they were not a big company. You know, think back to the George Bishop with his 27 workers. So Watts was much smaller. John died, and he's buried at Fulwood. Left 7,314, which again was a decent sum. His son John also described himself as a class maker, but transformed the firm into a fully fledged cutlery manufacturer. So it's interesting, still in the late 1890s, clasps for clogs were still significant. Okay, but seeing, you know, wider opportunities. And then this is really what typifies John Watts. This sort of went from being, you know, making one product to really just going for it with a wide range of products. So we've got pen and pocket knives, razors, skates, as in ice skates, graining combs. I used to work at the Sheffield College, and they had a sign writing department, and they used to have people who could do wood graining. so I'm presuming that's what a graining comb is for, clasps, stampers, and piercers. In 1890, they marketed a safety razor before Gillette. So this could have been a huge breakthrough. Now, there were a few other Sheffield companies that actually were in the running. There's a company called Wade and Butcher that were also in the running to sort of, but, you know, so Sheffield companies were falling over themselves to try and come up with things that weren't cutthroat razors. So Sheffield had been famous for cutthroat razors, but actually they were trying to get something that was a little bit safer for men to use, and so they didn't turn up at work every day with sort of, you know, cuts all over themselves. So it was based on a Fox safety razor that had been patented in 1892. Watt's trademark was the Gleaner, and actually we've got some razor blades in the collection. We've got a lot of razor blades in the collection, many of which are in the little packets, and some have got the Gleaner written on the outside. So Watts took out patents for his safety razor. He also took out patent for a cyclist knife, scissors, a razor sharpener, and a trouser press. Okay, so and that display board claiming, you know, they marketed the world's first safety razor. That's actually on the back there, so you can have a look at that. So they did a lot of advertising. Again, where did they advertise? You know, in the newspaper, maybe weekly magazines. But again, you know, they wouldn't have been making razors in many parts of the country. Probably just Sheffield. Okay, so these might have been appearing in London magazines. You know, and of course across the Commonwealth and in America. I think you need to use your, I mean, some of them are obvious, like that, this one on the left-hand side looks like you put razor blades in, but some of the others, I think it's a bit of a challenge thinking, how might these have been used? So by the start of the war, this First World War, they'd inquired most of the courtyard and the premises at the lower end of Lambert Street, including the premises of George Gill. So again, in the collection, we've got George Gill Cutlery. Doesn't say they took over George Gill, but they took over their premises. They started to buy up some brands. Again, this is quite typical of Sheffield Company. So that brand, B4 Star Any, which is quite a nice brand. The only problem is, again, in the early days, you'd see a knife with B4 Star Any, you think, well, who on earth does that belong to? It's only you have to put these pieces together. They also use the brand Manhattan. You know, it's amazing how many American phrases appear in either works or on Sheffield, you know, metal trades items to basically to get that American market. And H.T. Johnson and John Newton. I love these pictures of old Sheffield factories. They nearly always show this, a nice frontage. They show behind, which is probably in most cases pretty chaotic. There's lots of essentially little nesters workshops. And there's normally a couple of horses and carriages going up outside. I think there's probably some enterprising artist who actually did the same prints for all the different companies and said, I'll make it look grand. But we'll see this picture again a few times. But what is really nice is this is one of the few buildings that is still there. It's not far away, so I'm just sort of across the road. And it's had this lovely plasterwork on the front advertising what they actually made. And that's the thing that's reproduced from the catalogue. A range of products, pen and pocket knives, cutlery. I've just put the word gadgets, things like bottle openers, wood furniture products, and abrasive wheel dressers. We've got a bit. This is something in the Hawley collection, as you can see, it's stamped. This means it's been catalogued. We're getting very close to cataloguing 50,000 items. Okay, it means there's only at least another 50,000 to go. But it does list the directors, and it says John Robert Watts, Colonel Brian Watts. And so the story is actually the sort of trustees of the company lived in London, and they weren't exactly hands-on. Okay, so I'm presuming if the company was making a lot of money, they were quite happy to make the money, but actually they weren't hands-on in Sheffield. And again, of course, it's saying it's the Lambert Works. And of course, it's interesting, the London offices, Soho Square. So again, that maybe says something either about the market or the ambition of the company. So when I was doing this talk, I started, I had a look of images of John Watts on the internet. And I found this. And it was on eBay, and it was for sale. Thought, I haven't got one of these, got to have it. So this is from 1897. I think if you just saw the object, you might be thinking, what is it for? Any offers? It's a butter curler. Well done. Yeah, and probably it doesn't look like it was for the table. Maybe it was for the kitchen. But again, I've never seen one of these made by any other Sheffield company. So again, you know, there was that notion of thinking, you know, so did they make, I don't know, did they make a dozen of these? Did they make 1,000? Okay. Did they really catch on big style? Well, possibly not, because I've never seen one before in 11 years of doing this. But anyway, it was just a nice thing that we came across. So they made pen and pocket knives. They weren't the greatest pen and pocket knife maker in the city. There were others that were greater and grander, but they did turn out a significant volume. And and they were making them for quite a long time. I like these in the middle. You can't really see it, but this lists the kings and queens of England. So I don't know if this was when you were doing your history test at school. You got your penknife out and it got all the answers on them. Or whether that was just a good selling item, but I suppose quite a transition from, if you look at those knives that we had previously that had traditional scales on them. The one on the right got bone. That's either tortoiseshell or imitation tortoiseshell. But here in the next one, we've gone to this sort of all metal knives. A lot of it made of stainless steel. This product on the right, the Watts Easy Fold pocket knife, was really one of their trademark products. It was a very, very popular item that they made. You could fold it away. It was quite safe, made from stainless steel throughout, opened in a moment, even with gloves on by a simple unfolding movement. This is a small, neat, foolproof knife, ingeniously constructed so that the blade is absolutely rigid when open and cannot shut accidentally, however the knife is used. Ideal for the waistcoat pocket or the lady's handbag. So well, again, really, going for that market, really. A knife sharpener. Now, actually, I think this is on the back, and it's quite small. And it's funny, when I saw this, I had a vision of Ken Hawley, when he used to go and have his, he used to go and eat at Mellors at Hathersage. He used to take his own cutlery. And I also had that thought, I bet he took his own knife sharpener as well. This was a lovely thing that you could have put in your pocket. And it fits that sort of gadget category, I think. And so that's an advert for it, and we've actually got the thing at the back. Wood products. Now, this is the first cutlery talk I've ever given where we're going to talk about wood products. Developed with the furniture side because of the skill of making canteens. There's certain industries in Sheffield we totally forget about. A knife is useless without a handle, okay? Generally, people would have bought the cutlery, they would have often got them in wooden canteens. And sometimes the wooden canteens had legs and they could take 250 pieces, okay? So there was a big industry making those things. And there was again, talking to the family, they were busy between September and business with the London store business. January to July, they needed other work to keep the French polishers and the furniture finishers in business. So the timber side of the business really expanded. So we've got the Watts Patent Wardrobe Gentleman model. We've got the Watts Patent Wardrobe Ladies model. And they're quite different. And I showed this to some people who said, yes, the sort of blouse hanger there is absolutely right. And you've got a rack for your shoes. I don't know, if you're untidy like I am, then that sort of says tidiness, doesn't it? And you've got all your clothes put away. But again, if you'd actually said Sheffield was once famous for making furniture, you probably wouldn't have realised that. Look at this. Treble the capacity of your wardrobe. So that probably means you could get rid of, 2/3. If you're running out of space in your house, get rid of 2/3 of your wardrobes, get one of these. And the Watts number 611, fitting in a small wardrobe with garments pulled right out into the light. And so there was a huge bit of inventiveness going on here, and clearly a market. And there's a little red catalogue on the table. And I suppose I'd recognise some of the things in there. I thought, hang on, I've bought one of those. And I think a lot of this was probably during the wars. A lot of what, sort of utility type furniture, but, there's clearly quite a big market for this. There was a tie press. It's very rare, isn't it, now ever to see anybody wearing a tie, but, and I've got to say, in all my time of wearing a tie for work, I never ever ironed a tie once, I don't think, but, and this was one of the things about, Sheffield industry. If you could persuade people that you had a product and they needed it, that was half the sort of marketing. And clearly, this is patented, and what Sheffield, England, patent applied for, and it's got the B4 any brand on it. Okay, so, and these are still available on eBay. You can still buy them. Trouser press. Just a magazine rack, and the thing on the right, that sort of, when you've got your afternoon tea and you've got your 3 different layers of cakes and sandwiches laid out. A shooting stick. An occasional table. Coat hangers. Now, if somebody said to me, are there any coat hangers in the Hawley collection, I would have laughed at them. But sure enough, I found a box, and we've actually got about 5 of them. Okay, so and I'm sure that was something that came out of the John Watts factory. Enterprise dinghies, and well, also there is, well, I suppose it was 126 Enterprise dinghies. Of a specific sort of number of Enterprise dinghies that were a certain brand of them made, and they were very good quality, I believe. Abrupt ends the furniture side of the business. So on a Friday, cans of timber treatment were delivered to the factory, and they're in large drums that weren't marked. So the apprentice's job was to move them from A to B in the factory, take the lid off, dip a rag in them, smear the top of the can to show what was in that can, put the lid back on, and presumably business would carry on as normal next week. Well, unfortunately, one Friday afternoon, they were halfway through the process, i.e. they'd moved them and taken the lids off, and the hooter went for everybody to go home. So they all went home, and they left the lids off the cans, and unfortunately, when somebody came in on Monday morning and switched on some electrical equipment, the whole place went bang. The sort of good news is the insurance company paid up and were happy to actually replace everything. The bad news was, after that, they wouldn't insure them for making cutlery and furniture in the same building. So the furniture business actually came to an abrupt end. But there were other products. The celebrated egg opener. And we've got Paul here, who used to run the Sheffield shop, and this was one of his best-selling products when he could still get them. Okay? And actually, I've got to say, I don't think we've got one of these in the collection. We've got the advertising materials in the collection, but I had to nick that picture off the internet. So if anybody's got one of those spare, we might like one for the collection. Grinding, wheel dressing for sharpening grinding wheels. So very, very sort of technical, very specialist product. Again, somebody in the audience was saying this was something that they used to buy from the company. This is just quite an amusing customer interaction, which again, it's the wonderful thing. So the letter says, I have noted with interest your letter of the 12th instant regarding our price increase of 5%. Our last increase is covering a period of 21 months. It is such a long time since I've had the pleasure of speaking to you, I could not resist the temptation to drop you a line. Especially as the issue is purely academic, as you've not purchased these particular items for us for over 20 years. Although I'm pleased to say many of your employees do. How delightfully quaint your explanation of the reduction in inflation. I am sure Maggie would be most intrigued. I do wish you would write to the Sheffield City Council explaining the impossibilities of increasing prices and that you find it strange that we should be accepting increases in excess of the rate of inflation. How right you are. Possibly you may be interested in the following few basic increases of which we have been inflicted in the last year, and it goes on to say, lists a whole load of increases in prices, and it finishes off, however, I must confess that we've not increased wages in over 2 years, and I've not had an increase myself in over 3 years. And if our regular customers take your own very commendable attitude, I shan't get one for another 3. Any good jobs going in Carbo, yours faithfully, and that was Ronald Bishop. But well, I suppose again, and this just sums up, in the Hawley collection, we've got lots of physical objects, but we've also got lots of nice ephemera, and we've got photographs, and again, it's just great to get these things out and to interact with them, and they all sort of tell a story. So the business was run by a trust, mainly family members who did it in Sheffield. They had good military links. Remember, one of them had been a colonel, so they did quite well out of some armaments contract. The First World War was a disruption to the workforce, as it was for every Sheffield company. Lots of the workforce went away and didn't ever come back. After the Second World War, the company was struggling. They brought in Ron Bishop, who had a strong engineering background, to run the company. 1971, Michael Bishop joined the company, established a special products division. So they had a lot of space, they had a lot of expertise, but I suppose some of it was trying to home in on products that people actually wanted to buy. And just a number of possibilities. So one was coming up with a concrete planing machine, which was a potential product that never really took off. They were going to move premises, so that was what the premises looked like. And they were all lined up to move in premises, and then they were told they couldn't drill holes in the floor, and they had lots of very massive, machinery and presses and things where they needed to drill holes in the floor. So the company was actually wound up in 2000. There were attempts to revive the company in sort of two halves, the skate business and the cutlery business, particularly making pocket knives. And that was going into sort of two separate entities, okay? And there was also the idea of the premises being a location for a working heritage centre. You know, and it's interesting, people still talk about heritage apprenticeships, and it's something that's never quite taken off. And clearly we have got people around the city who are still making some of those products. The premises have been saved, and as they are today, really nice apartments. And the plasterwork on the front is fantastic, and if you've never seen it, it's really worth going to have a look at it. I quite like this photograph because actually, on the very top right, there's one of the old adverts from the company that says Gleaners, and that was the brand of one of their razors. Okay, so you know, the bad news is the company's still not there making anything. The good news is the building's there and it's actually been revived. And I guess that whole area, you know, sort of behind the Fire Brigade Museum is just sort of becoming more and more trendy, and you know, Kelham, Neeps, and the whole sort of growth area. So I'd just like to thank Geoffrey Tweedale, who provided some of this information, the Bishop family, who have been kind enough, Bishop and Fry family, who have been kind enough to meet and had a few chats with them, and obviously Ken Hawley, who was the inspiration for the collection.